Hello everyone. I'm Christy Canitz. I went to school here and our lunch is coming. It's good to know. Nothing's changed. No, nothing's changed. I'm so pleased to be introducing Michelle Basic-Hendry today into the case of distinction, Shelley, and that is with one L, not two. Very insistent on that in high school. As I knew her back in her high school days, King City, she's always been a gifted artist. We joke that I've been the president of her stocking club since I inaugurated it back in those early days. I own a number of her pieces, and if her reputation hadn't gotten out of my price range, I would own a lot more of her pieces. A little disappointed. Every once in a while she'll give me something, which is fabulous. But back to the days at King. Michelle and I found each other in grade 9. We definitely were not part of the in crowd, a little too off-center for that. I loved creative writing and music and geography. She loved art and history. And somehow that combination of the arts, along with human culture and landscape, as well as a deep and abiding love of lemon cookies and homemade jam tarts, brought us together as enduring friends. We had an equally eclectic group of friends, and we spent our lunches hanging out in Mr. Gould's geography room, discussing the world, playing poker, strip poker sometimes, which no one actually knew about till now. and our rather gory version of hangman that we called guillotine man.
Take the limbs off.
Yeah, that's right. I've always had an incredible respect and admiration for those that can draw and paint, probably because I'm so completely inept at doing that myself. My children have always complained they can't recognize a stick figure when I draw it. Really, I can't. But one of them said the other day, there's someone at school that doesn't put the heads on her stick figures. It doesn't join the body. And I said, they're supposed to. Okay, now I know. I'm always awed by those that can put not just a scene on a piece of canvas or into a sculpture, but put an emotion there as well. Michelle's style's changed over the years. She'll say it's improved, but I always thought it was pretty darn good. But that raw talent has always been there. I was probably the first one to congratulate Michelle when she announced she was closing out her graphic arts business to become a full-time artist. And that took a lot because to say that to her, because Michelle was our company's graphic artist at the time. And her talents created our company's logo that's helped define our brand in North America and around the world. She was, I believe you said it was your first logo that you've done, and it's recognized around the world in our industry. Michelle designed all our promotional materials, website, back when it was brand new, and all the other graphic materials we used in our business. But as much as I was losing a really valued resource on the business side, I knew it was Michelle's destiny. I have to say that I've used the friendship card though since then. I still occasionally get the odd job done just by pulling that friendship card out and saying, I don't know what to do, please help me. And she will. It's really been interesting watching Michelle's interests in art each take their own path and then join to become a single passion. The Christmas after graduating from King, Michelle presented me with a pencil sketch as a gift. Her parents had it professionally framed behind museum quality glass, and it's hung on my wall ever since. Its title is Apollo's Temple, and it shows the ruins of a Greek building. At the time, I was pretty darn convinced she was going to go into archaeology and spend her life digging in some distant country, discovering as yet undiscovered history. Instead, she brought that love of history back to our backyard. I've always rolled my eyes and kind of listened sort of patiently when she went on and on and on and on about some door latch that she found in a historic building that she was researching on her own or through LACAC. But really, a door latch, honest to God, a door latch. I didn't get it until years later when I started seeing her paintings of these door latches and old chairs and even older sinks and peeling paint and the buildings that she found them in. What Michelle finds and puts into her paintings is beyond just a representation of those things. In her work, you can feel that human history that still haunts these buildings. You know that countless hands have touched those latches, sat in those chairs, used those sinks, and you can still feel those stories that are there, and that's what she puts into our art. Her rural landscapes are recording our history, but also some of the stories that otherwise would be lost. I wrote a testimonial for her a couple years back, and I described what I find so wonderful in her work. I believe it shows the beauty of these buildings, the human elements of structure and detail, but also nature's beauty kind of creeping along the old bones. It's not hopeless though. When you look at these, they're not just run-down buildings. there's a picture of strength that's kind of gracefully fading back into nature's arms. And I think that especially in this area that's being developed so quickly, we're losing that. We're losing that feeling of there used to be history here. You know, it's just subdivision. So I really love that she's keeping that. So as the president of her unofficial fan club, I could keep going on, but Tom Ellison's given me a hard stop, and I did give a couple of my minutes to Michelle. So I think at 5 minutes, the school band is probably around there. And since there's no field out there, I'm sure the football team's practicing back here is going to tackle me off stage or something. So to wrap it up, I'm so proud to be introducing Michelle as an inductee into the Case of Distinction. And now you get to do your speech.
One of the best things I got from King City was my best friend. Before I start, I just want to say that I immediately got nervous as soon as I saw Dr. Smerica sit down next to my father, because I seem to remember a very interesting parent-teacher night where it was revealed that I was not doing so well in physics. And so all those feelings came rushing back. Anyway, I want to say thank you very much for this honor. I'm quite, overwhelmed. As I was gathering my thoughts on what to say here today, I realized that the seeds of my passions for old buildings and art originated right here at King. At the time, I had no idea these passions would merge, nor could I guess they would end up defining the creative work that I do today. Art isn't exactly a career I would have considered at 18. It seemed a little left field even for me, and you can tell by Guillotine Man, I was already way in left field. Well-known American craftsman speaker Bruce Baker said, "To the ordinary public, artists are the people who ran away to join the circus." One of my mentors said that people love to hear about the lives of artists to try to understand what makes us different from normal people. I kind of didn't really understand that. The fact that I don't exactly fit into the mainstream isn't a newsflash. For years, I could never figure out why I always seemed to be living on a different frequency. I was a bit of an outsider, and social signals were missed, probably because I never bothered to put up the antenna. From time to time, certain things got through the noise, and they made an impact on me. In high school, Mr. Henderson and Mr. Ellison's history classes instilled a passion for lives of those who came before us, and of course were, as we all remember, were always most entertaining. Another class that had a major impact on me that I ended up taking because I'm a first-story Christy, hated music class. I tried. To say that I sucked at playing a musical instrument is a major, major understatement. Home practice, of course, would have been helpful, but it was rare, and I did it only to avoid complete humiliation during music tests. And my refusal to continue taking music after grade 10 was likely more of a relief to my music teacher than it was even to me. So that's how I ended up in Mr. White's art class. During one class, the lights were turned off and the slide projector was turned on. Beautiful colors and ideas replaced the chalkboard, and Mr. White gave one of the most memorable lectures of the year on Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. And it left a permanent impression on me. One that followed me to Paris, thanks to a King City trip a year later in 1988, going through the L'Orangerie, the experience of original Monet, Gauguin, Rousseau, and Renoir, through the Barnes exhibit in Toronto a few years later to see how small the canvas of Monk's screen really was for such a big painting. And finally back to my backyard at the McMichael Canadian Art Collection and our own group of 7. In 1992, at the opening of the David Milne exhibition, I had the pleasure of meeting the last of the group of 7, A.J. Casson, who, in spite of the fact that he couldn't hear a word that any of us said to him, had a wonderful joke every time. Art ceased to be decoration at that point and had all the great value of great literature and history books. During that same 1988 trip through King, I also visited Egypt. I was amazed by the paintings that local artists made of the reliefs that they saw on their ancient monuments. I bought my first original work of art on the streets of Cairo, and I still have several of them hanging in various places, although they're all packed right now. I'll explain that later. In the summer between high school and university, I took a job with the King Township Heritage Committee, which at that time was known as the LACAC, Local Architectural Conservation Advisory Committee. Say that 10 times quickly. Now you know why they changed the name. I'm pretty sure that Mr. Ellison might have recommended me for that, I'm not sure. Anyway, a rescue was being proposed by council, and Leslie Tomlinson, who was one of my liaison at the time, and I were recruited to explore the old King Railway Station. And it was reputed to be one of the oldest of its kind still in existence. And the building, of course, sat on blocks at the Courtright Conservation property back then. And I suppose if you drive along Kingside Road toward Highway 400, you can see the building in the museum property now. There's something about an old building sitting amongst the wildflowers that inspires my imagination. The many abandoned and derelict places I found that summer were like magic boxes of mystery filled with the evidence of another way of life. I was hooked. I went on to study at the University of Toronto and I studied history. I found it interesting, but the abstract nature of books without a place was frustrating. I finally had enough in the beginning of my 4th year and ditched my classes in the middle of term and flew to England. I was fascinated by the sunken roads into the English landscape by centuries of travelers, the old stone and brick houses as common as house cats lining their edges. And during that trip, I even had the opportunity to ride in a 1921 Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. That's history. And it's also very cool because those cars are huge and English roads are very narrow. So every time you came around a corner, you were kind of hoping. Which is why the guy, I don't think he took it out very often, so it's quite a privilege. Following graduation, I worked in a bookstore, a burger joint, an ice cream parlor, and as a weekend DJ for a commercial radio station in Muskoka. Toward the end of what I can say was a kind of wandering, I returned to Britain, ending up in the Scottish Highlands. There's an old crumbling 13th century castle just outside Fort William. It was, at that time, closed to the public. I was quite disappointed until I discovered that closed is a relative term. Someone had torn back the fences and gained entry to the old site, and I figured who was I to resist. I climbed up one of the turrets, the wet and worn steps slippery and barely horizontal. When I returned to ground level, I was spotted by a passing car and figured I better hightail it out of there. I wasn't prepared to explain to my father that he would need to bail me out of jail. Oh, and that was a Scottish jail. And yeah, I hadn't told him that time I was going either. The following autumn, I attended Georgian College to study graphic design. I was invited within a year of graduating to instruct part-time in the new postgrad program in web design while I started my business. Teaching, starting business, same time, not recommended. I built a list of fiercely loyal clients, including Christy, I found, though, that I was a bit of a perfectionist and teaching was a little bit difficult for me as an introvert. It added to a lot of pressure that was building over the years because I felt as though what I was doing wasn't completely me. It was damaging my health in the process. By the end of 2003, I was completely burned out. I felt like I was being crushed and I couldn't breathe. After curating a successful stained glass show in late 2004, I literally collapsed. I had hidden my exhaustion until I could no longer function, and I had to scale the business back. I avoided travel of any kind, and I stopped taking on new clients. It was then I knew that I had to act on the artist within me. It took me nearly 3 years to get back on my feet, and during that time I dabbled in painting. I had taken the odd workshop over the years, but I hadn't really developed any skill to speak of, just an irresistible desire. Contemporary realist Scott Owls offered me the opportunity to take lessons with him in exchange for a website in 2006, and this was quite a compliment. Scott is a magnificent painter who has been compared to Vermeer, and he was trained in Florence, Italy. So this was definitely, the website was great, but I'll never forget the lessons in his studio. After a year of practice in some of the worst crap I have ever painted, and believe me, when you start changing your style, it all comes out looking like poop. Somehow it all together, and my craft was finally at the level that made my art possible. I was offered a solo exhibition in 2008, and while out hunting for subject matter, I found the old frame house in the middle of a field in the January twilight. The history and the art, like nuclear fusion, ignited. In the 3 short years since, I've shown in juried exhibitions, including McMichael, been elected to national and international organizations, garnered substantial media coverage, and won various awards inside and outside of my community. Later, the historian in me went on to find people connected to the old buildings in my paintings, and I listened to their stories, and I wrote them down. The house that has been the subject of many recent works has deteriorated considerably in the last year and is now slated for demolition. A few days ago, I decided to visit one last time. I climbed the stairs to the arched doorway in the painting room with a view. Someone had nailed some boards across the opening and torn up the floors. The rooms were covered in paintball stains. Soon, no trace will remain of the house built by the man who started a brief Muskoka gold rush in 1877. Rejected by his fiancée, he never actually lived in the house, and the 90-year-old woman who shared the story with me has recently passed away. Right now, while my studio is currently in boxes and headed shortly to Oklahoma, my efforts are focused on getting those stories into print. Like the buildings I paint, the foundation laid in high school has endured. Life experiences are the bricks that have created who I am today, and this house of my life has many rooms. The journey that has helped me discover those rooms I could never have imagined. Mr. Ellison, Mr. Henderson, and Mr. White offered me the keys. So thank you again for this honor. I would like to leave you with a few lines from the upcoming book because I believe they best express the source of my creative inspiration. A vanishing rainstorm left a brisk penetrating breeze in its wake. The brick house sat blind with its windows shattered or entirely absent, allowing the wind to wander through its rooms unrestrained. A gust moved a loose door, tapping and knocking on its broken jamb. The walls whispered and wailed as the air pushed through the lath, left exposed like an untended wound. The sharp roughness of peeling paint broke off in my hands, and when the wind subsided, the house breathed its musty breath over me. Thank you.